the surface. Don't know what you're expecting of me, but under the pressure of walking in your shoes,
caught in the undertow, just caught in the undertow.
every step that I take is another mistake to you.
Caught in the undertow, just caught in the undertow.
I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Become so tired, so much more aware. I'm becoming this. All I want you to do is be more like me and be less like you. Can't you see that you're smothering me, holding too tightly, afraid to lose control? 'Cause everything that you thought I would be has fallen apart right in front of you.
Caught in the undertow, just caught in the undertow.
Every step that I take is another mistake to you.
Caught in the undertow, just caught in the undertow.
And every second I waste is more than I can take. I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Become so tired, so much more aware. I'm becoming this. All I want you to do is be more like me and be less like you. And I know I may end up failing too, but I know you were just like me, with someone disappointed in you. I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Become so tired, so much more aware. I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Become so tired, so much more aware. I'm becoming this. All I want you to do is be more like me and be less like you. And I know I may end up failing too, but I know you were just like me, with someone disappointed in you. I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Become so tired, so much more aware. I'm becoming this. All I want you to do is be more like me and be less like you. I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Time to be what you want me to be. I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Time to be what you want me to be.
Hey guys, this is Abaddon here. So as you would have seen from the gameplay footage just before, I've put together a very unique fire-based wizard, and the whole idea behind this wizard is using Mammoth Hydra as my signature spell. Okay, so when we have a look at my gear later on, you'll see that I've stacked a lot of fire damage, but I've also stacked a bit of resource cost reduction, and I've gotten to the point where Hydra is essentially free, and that's why you see when I'm running around, I'm casting a lot of Hydras all over the place. And when you add the area of effect damage from Mammoth Hydra to Meteor Shower, you can very, very effectively rain a lot of death and destruction down on your enemies very, very quickly, while still retaining a lot of mobility in your build. So I thought I'd put together this video just to show off and showcase the build a little bit. I've never actually seen anyone else using Hydras quite the same way that I'm using them. And so I wanted to give you a bit of background into the logic behind the build, how exactly Mammoth Hydra works, and why it's very effective as a signature spell. Later on I'll jump into a couple of areas to show exactly how Mammoth Hydra works just by itself without casting meteors and things. And then we'll come back and have a look at the skills and gear in a little bit more detail. So, first things first, why did I choose fire as my element? As a wizard, you have 5 options really. You've got fire, lightning, cold, and arcane, and the 5th option is a combination of those. Now I chose fire because when you look at your inventory, you've got 13 slots for gear, and the skill, fire skills deal 17 more damage. That affix is available on up to 8 items at once, which is more than any other element. So I have fire damage on my source, my Stone of Jordan, my braces, amulet, my Andariels, my chest, my gloves. It is actually possible to get a fire weapon as well, Burning Axe of Sankis and the Devastator Mace. So if you don't have this particular wand, you can actually use those weapons as well. So I'm running 7 pieces with fire, and there is potential for 8, and that is more than any other element. So DPS wise, fire has the highest potential. So that's why I chose fire. The drawback of fire though is that you don't have a lot of crowd control. Now as a lightning wizard, for example, you have the paralysis passive, which stuns enemies, keeps them in place. As a arcane wizard, you have temporal flux, which slows enemy down by 80%, which is huge. So again, that's really good crowd control as an arcane wizard. As a cold wizard, well, every enemy you hit with cold damage chills them or freezes them in some way. So again, that adds a lot of crowd control there. But as a fire wizard, you've got nothing. You've got no crowd control whatsoever other than black hole. So mobility is very, very important. Because you can't control the crowds, you need to be able to run around and dodge them. And that's why pretty much every fire wizard you'll see in public games, pretty much all of them use magic missile with the mirror ball wizard source, which adds up to 2 magic missiles. Most of them do that because they can cast magic missile. It does really good DPS whilst they're running away from enemies, and that's a very viable build. It does good DPS. It's viable in T5, T6. Fantastic. I'm using it slightly differently because I'm using Mammoth Hydra rather than magic missile. And to be honest, I think that this is a bit more fun. It's really awesome to see fucking giant dragons pop out of the ground and blast the shit out of everything. And visually, it's a lot more appealing than running around shooting 3 little puffs of fairy dust at people. So, for every fire build that you might make, you need to think about mobility because you don't have crowd control. You need to be able to dodge enemies. So, I feel that I've got that in this build. I can run around and cast hydras wherever the hell I want. I can cast meteors while I'm kiting away, and enemies just melt whilst they're running after me. So this is a very effective way of using your fire skills. So why fire? A lot of DPS and and mobility. It's a fast play style. So that's why I've chosen fire. What really set this build off is 2 items in particular. First one is the Serpent Sparker wand, enabling me to have 2 hydras up at the same time. The other item was the Cindercoat, because that reduces resource cost of fire skills by 30%, which is huge, and it adds fire damage. So those 2 items are the 2 items that you really, really need to carry off this build. That one to have the hydras up, and the Cindercoat to reduce the cost of hydras to a point where it is spammable and it doesn't cost you any arcane power. It also helps out a huge amount with meteors, because with the amount of resource cost reduction I've got across my gear, I can cast, I think 9 casts off Meteor Shower, which is 9 times 7, that's 63 meteors raining down on enemies. So those are really the 2 items of the build. So Mammoth Hydra as a signature spell, let's talk about that. The way Mammoth Hydra works is, let's just imagine that there's an enemy standing here on the waypoint. When I cast my first Hydra, it will blast a river of flame towards the enemy, and any enemy caught within this channel will be burnt for 179 weapon damage per second. Okay, so huge damage and over a really good AoE. When you cast a second Hydra, it will also create a river of flame, so you eventually have double the AoE. Okay, the cool thing is when you cast your third Hydra, it will blast a river. The first one disappears, but its AoE remains for another few seconds. So what you essentially have is you have 3 Hydras all creating AoE all at the same time. And if you're casting fast enough, you can actually get up to 4, up to 5 Hydras effect all on the ground at the same time. So when you're spamming Hydras, you're not just getting 2 rivers. you're getting a lot of them. So, and that's why you see in the gameplay footage that you can cover the ground in Hydra fire, and it does a shitload of DPS. So Mammoth Hydra is a signature spell. I feel that it actually works very, very well. It works in a similar way to Magic Missile, because Magic Missile, the fire rune, it pierces through enemies and does damage in a line. So does Mammoth Hydra, but the AoE just lasts a lot longer than Magic Missile. So in many ways it is superior. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a couple of areas. We're going to kill some mobs, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use Mammoth Hydra. I'm not going to cast Magic Missile or anything, and I'll explain sort of the way you want to set up your Hydras. So you want to try and cast them in a circle around the mobs, okay? And as you can see, you can set up an area of crossfire where everything just gets burnt to crisps. So you see that? So in an open area, kind of like Festering Woods, what you want to do is, yeah, set up your Hydras in a circle around your enemies, because no matter where they run, they're going to get burnt. If you need to kite away from an enemy, you can cast Hydras in your own path, and as enemies are running after you, they're going to be running into your Hydra fire, which of course is not really good for their health. So you can see here just how much of an area we can cover with Hydras. It's a huge amount. So let's just kite away from these guys. As they're running after me, you can see they're just running into Mammoth Hydra fire, and they're just getting burnt to shits. So Mammoth Hydra just by itself is more than capable of clearing out trash mobs, even clearing out elites if you wish. Usually when I come across an elite pack, this is when I'll start spamming Meteor to really burst them down and get rid of them quickly. But this is really, like I said, just to illustrate just how effective Mammoth Hydra is just by itself. So here's a bit of a group. Oh, here's a gobby. So like I said, with champion packs, or let's just say this gobby, what I'd do is I'd suck them up with a black hole, and then I'd chuck down a whole heap of meteors, and boom, shit dies very quickly. So don't be afraid to spam Meteor. It's essentially a free spell with this build, so you can cast as many of them as you like, and yeah, it works very, very well. So let's just do this area. There's usually an elite pack at the end of this dungeon, so we'll just roast up these skellies. So as I'm moving forward, you can see the mobility is still there. You know, I've got a great amount of mobility. I can move around pretty much however I want. Got enough toughness as well that I can sort of survive on T4 very, very easily. And as I'm kiting away, I'll just cast down more Hydras. Everything starts to die. Alright. Alright, let's kill him quickly. So right now, with a couple of Hydras up, Meteors coming down, I've covered pretty much the whole screen in fire. It's yeah, a very effective way of playing the game. This build works really, really, really well in party play essentially because the DPS is just immense. To be honest, in T5, T6, it's quite a bit more difficult because you don't have, like I said, you don't have as much crowd control. But if you're good at kiting and you're good at moving around, and you know you kind of practice a little bit with positioning your Hydras, this is very viable. I am currently running T5, T6, clearing rifts and around, sort of 14 to 15 minutes. So it's not the fastest build in the world, but it sure is a hell of a lot of fun. So, all right. Okay, so let's head back to town and we'll go through the items and the skills that I'm using. So let's have a quick look at the gear. Serpent Sparker we've sort of covered, and the Cindercoat that enables the Hydras having 2 at a time, and that adds fire damage and reduces the resource cost, which makes Hydra and Meteor spammable. I also use Captain Crimson's belt and pants and the Royal Ring of Grandeur to get the 3-set bonus. This is really good because it reduces resource cost by a further 10%. It's a really nice little set actually. It adds a bit of life regen, it adds a bit of toughness, and it reduces cooldowns and resource cost. The 2-set bonus reducing cooldown of all skills, it's not really that useful because there's only one spell that we're using that actually has a cooldown, and it's fairly short already, 12 seconds. But hey, everything every little bit helps. But yeah, that extra 10% is very, very good. When you add that to your Cindercoat, you're getting, you know, essentially like a 40% resource cost reduction just like that. You can also put some Paragon points into resource cost reduction and get that even higher. I was lucky enough to roll resource cost reduction on my wand, so that's quite useful as well. So all up, you can get your Meteor cost down to under 20, and you can get your Hydra cost down to under 7. So very, very useful. I'm also using the All Gold set. Again, it's a craftable set, so it's pretty easy to get hold of, but it makes you more tough. It reduces damage from ranged, melee and elites, but it also increases damage against elites, which is really, really good. I'm using a Stone of Jordan, fire damage, which is brilliant, and more damage against elites, which is you know, so useful in higher torments. The rest of my gear is really just your sort of stock standard fire gear. Mage Fist gloves, which gives you fire damage, and you know, all the lovely attributes like intelligence, crit damage and crit chance, and Dales for the fire damage, intelligence and a bit of life. Amulet, I'm running a golden gorget off Leoric. That's the best amulet I've found so far. Ideally, if I could get a similar rolled amulet on one of those immunity amulets, that would be friggin' amazing. But every immunity amulet that I've ever gotten has usually been a really shit roll, so I haven't had much luck with that. And then I'm also running the Firebird's Eye because it has fire damage on the source, and the Firebird's Boots, so I can collect the 500 bonus intelligence. If you don't have a Firebird's Eye source, you can quite happily run a Triumvirate, which is a fairly common drop. That does also give you fire damage, which is very useful, and then you can run whatever boots you want. But that's generally the way I've gone for my build. So as a general rule with items, you need Cindercoat and you need the Serpent Sparker. The rest of it, you just want to stack fire damage, and then the usual intelligence, crit chance, crit damage. With Paragon points, I have buffed my movement speed to 25%, and then the rest goes into intelligence. With offense, you don't really need attack speed with this build, so you're going to get better return on crit chance and crit damage. Cooldown reduction again is not necessary for this build. Defense, whatever works for you. I was a little bit light on resist all, so I stacked that, and then I'm stacking life because I've only got 355. If you've got a lot of life, you can stack armor. Just you juggle those depending on your gear and see what gives you the best return on your toughness stat there. And then with utility, realistically the only useful stat here is resource cost reduction. It's the only useful stat because Hydras don't proc area damage, and I don't believe Meteors do either, so correct me if I'm wrong on that. So resource cost is really the only useful one. However, I'm just putting the rest into life on hit. Might as well get a little bit of life regen when I cast my Meteors. So that's how I've set up my Paragon points. Let's have a closer look at the skills. Mammoth Hydra is kind of an obvious choice. Great AoE damage, and actually it does really good single target damage as well. There's a bit of confusion in the forums as to which does better single target damage, Blazing Hydra or Mammoth Hydra. I've done quite a few GOM runs, and I'll actually post a separate video to showcase this, but I can categorically say that Mammoth Hydra does more single target damage than Blazing Hydra. On a T2 GOM, two Mammoth Hydras will kill him in about 15 to 16 seconds, which works out to about 14 million damage per second per Hydra. The Blazing Hydra, having two Blazing Hydras go hard at GOM, that kills him in about 22 to 23 seconds, so quite a bit slower. So I can categorically say Mammoth Hydra does more DPS, single target and AoE, so that's definitely the one to go for. My right click, I'm using Meteor with Meteor Shower. Having 7 small meteors come down for 228 weapon damage is fucking huge DPS over a really good area. I mean, check out the area. It's really it's massive. The drawback of this is that it is random, so you can see in that cast there was a bit of an area here that wasn't hit. If you're doing, you know, Rift Guardians, you're doing the Rifted Forward community, for example, feel free to experiment with just using plain unruined Meteor, because that hits for 500% weapon damage, and that's pretty damn good at burning down Rift Guardians. So for most scenarios I use Meteor Shower, but you can experiment with plain unruined Meteor as well, see how you go. Black Hole, there's a couple options here. You can use Spell Steal or the Blazar Rune. This is the CC in the build. This is sucks enemies up, within a 15-yard radius, and it does a fair amount of DPS just by itself, especially as the Blazar rune. That does huge DPS, particularly with stacking 100% plus fire damage. That kills mobs just by itself, particularly in T2, T3. I quite like the Arcane rune because it reduces the damage that you receive from enemies who've been hit by Black Hole by 10%, which is really good in T5, T6. But also it increases the damage that you do by 3% for 5 seconds. So what I'd generally do is, I'd set up a bit of, Hydra AoE damage. Once the mob's in a good place and I think I'll get a good cast, I will pop down my Black Hole. And if I suck up, say, 10 enemies, that increases my damage by 30% for 5 seconds. So in that 5 seconds, when I start bursting down the meteors, that is a considerable amount of damage. So really good for mobs and doing rifts and things like that. If you're doing Rift Guardians in the Rift Forward community, switch it over to the Blazar rune because you're only going to get 3% when you hit a Rift Guardian with Spell Steal. So change it over to the Blazar, you might as well have the increased DPS. Next I use Familiar with Spark Flint. You get that 10% flat damage increase from Spark Flint, but also the Familiar by itself, it does 179 weapon damage per hit, and because I'm stacking a lot of fire damage, obviously, that little guy does a fair amount of DPS just by himself. I'm also using Magic Weapon with the Force Weapon rune. 20% flat damage bonus is brilliant. In higher torments you can change to Deflection to get a bit more toughness. And as my energy armor rune, I'm using Pinpoint Barrier. I like energy armor. It's a good balance between increasing your toughness and also increasing your DPS. In higher torments, you kind of need to change that to prismatic armor to make yourself more tough. But for T4, Pinpoint Barrier is fine. If you don't need the toughness at all, and you're fine, and you've got a really good critical chance, you can experiment with Storm Armor, Power off the Storm. Reason being, Storm Armor does not decrease your arcane power by 20. Okay, so that means you can get an extra cast of Meteor out. Also, it reduces the arcane power cost of all skills by 3. So when you put this rune on, check out how many meteors you can cast. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 casts of Meteor without running out of arcane power. It makes a massive, massive difference. So if you're running lower torments, have a good play with that rune. It works really, really well. But in certainly higher torments, I like having the DPS buff or the toughness buff. So that's how I run that. With your passives, Conflagration is obviously a really good rune. Any fire damage dealt to enemies applies a burning effect that increases their chance to be critically hit by 6%. The really cool thing about this applies to a party. Okay, so any enemy that I burn, which is a lot of them, they're going to get critically hit 6% more times by my entire party. So that's very, very useful, and it is a really good DPS buff. You can't see it in your sheet damage, but it's there. It makes a big difference. Got a couple of toughness spells. I'm using Blur because it decreases damage by 17%, which is lovely. Dominance again adds to my toughness. You can actually change that to Elemental Exposure, which works quite well for a damage buff. With this build, the way it's set up, I've got arcane damage here. I've got fire damage obviously, and I've got a bit of lightning damage from my Serpent Sparker, so I could get the 15% damage buff, which I actually normally use on Torment 4. However, you can kind of play that by ear how you want to do that. Dominance or Elemental Exposure. Certainly in the higher torments, I find that Dominance just makes me live that little bit longer and is very, very useful. The last passive I use is very important. It's Astral Presence. Increases your maximum arcane power by a further 20, which is another cast of Meteor, which is great. And it also increases your arcane power regeneration by 2. So because I'm not using a signature spell, I don't regenerate arcane power other than the passive. So with Astral Presence, I regenerate arcane power at 12 per second. So yeah, it just means you can spam Hydras and spam Meteors just that little bit more often. So that's how it all works, guys. That's the fire build. It's very, very fun to play. If you have the Serpent Sparker and the Cindercoat, I seriously suggest you try this out. See how you go with using Mammoth Hydra as a signature spell. I think it works very, very well. Feel free to post some comments below and give me your feedback. I'd love to hear from you guys. Alright, good luck up there.